When were you married?
Pardon?
When were you married?
Well, we leave our personal questions out of this, sir.
All right, well, good luck.
He was 45, she was 20, and her jealous husband had once stabbed him with a knife. Another man proposed to a woman he'd just met on set, while his own wife was on a sinking ocean liner. And one of Hollywood's richest moguls spent years trying to legally marry a 16-year-old beauty queen while secretly living with her under his mother's nose. These aren't movie plots, they're real old Hollywood love stories, with age gaps so big they'd make headlines even today.
In Hollywood in 1 year. This and this.
Number 1. Gian Harlo and Paul Byrne, 21 and 41. Gian Harlo was Hollywood's original platinum blonde bombshell. By 21, she was already a star. Bold, beautiful, and unforgettable. But it was her marriage to MGM producer Paul Byrne that raised more than a few questions. Byrne was 41 when he married the young actress in 1932. That's a 20-year age gap. Notable enough for the Los Angeles Times to comment that Harlo had taken as her husband a man considerably her senior. But even more shocking than the age difference was what followed. Just 2 months after their wedding, Byrne was found dead in their home. It was ruled a suicide, but the mystery only deepened when it was discovered that he had another wife, Dorothy Millette, still alive and still in contact with him. She too died shortly after under suspicious circumstances. The tragedy left Harlo a widow at 21, and the truth of what really happened remains a haunting Hollywood mystery. Number 2. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. and Sylvia Ashley, 52 and 31. Douglas Fairbanks was silent film royalty, and half of Hollywood's first power couple with Mary Pickford. But by the early 1930s, their fairy tale had soured. Enter Lady Sylvia Ashley, a glamorous young British socialite. Fairbanks was instantly smitten. At the time, Ashley was 26 and Pickford was nearing 40, and felt, in her own words, unable to compete with Sylvia's youthful allure. Fairbanks strung Pickford along for 2 painful years before finally divorcing her in 1933. Just 3 years later, he married Sylvia Ashley. He was 52, she was 31. According to those close to the couple, including the scandal-prone Duchess of Argyll, Fairbanks became obsessively jealous of his much younger wife. He reportedly hated letting her out of his sight. Still, they stayed together until his death in 1939. Sylvia went on to marry again, most notably to Clark Gable, another Hollywood legend 2 decades her senior. Number 3. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, 45 and 20. When Lauren Bacall walked onto the set of To Have and Have Not, she wasn't just a new actress, she was still a teenager. Humphrey Bogart, her co-star, was 45 and already a legend in his own right. Their chemistry, both on and off screen, was electric. He fell in love during filming, but there was a problem. Bogart was still married to Mayo Methau, a woman known for her temper and her drinking. The marriage was volatile. At one point, Methau even stabbed Bogart in a jealous rage. Eventually, Bogart secured a divorce, and in 1945 he married Bacall. He was 45, she had just turned 20. The 25-year age gap made headlines, but Bacall embraced it. Years later, she called it the most fantastic thing for me to have in my life. Still, it wasn't always easy. Bogart wanted a traditional wife, not a working actress. Bacall's career took a hit, and while they loved each other deeply, both reportedly had emotional affairs outside the marriage. When Bogart died in 1957, Bacall was only 32 and a widow. Number 4. William Randolph Hurst and Marian Davies, 54 and 20. William Randolph Hurst wasn't an actor, but his influence over Hollywood was enormous. As a newspaper magnate, his money and power could make or break careers. When he met Marian Davies in 1917, she was a chorus girl, talented, charming, and just 20 years old. Hurst was 54. He was instantly captivated. Gifts, phone calls, secret meetings, it didn't take long before they were a couple. But Hurst was already married, and his devout Catholic wife refused to grant him a divorce. So Hurst and Davies lived together in a shadow of secrecy, or at least they tried. He built her lavish homes, cast her in films, and kept her constantly under surveillance when he was away, hiring detectives to follow her every move. Despite his obsessive jealousy, the two remained together for over 30 years. Davies became a respected actress in her own right, especially known for her comedic talent, and even loaned Hurst $1 million when his empire was struggling. But when he died in 1951, she wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. Elizabeth Taylor, aged 20 and 40, and later 23 and 43. Elizabeth Taylor lived many lives in one. A child star turned Hollywood icon, she married 8 times, but her early romances often included significant age gaps. Her second husband, British actor Michael Wilding, was 20 years her senior. They met on set in 1951 when Taylor was just 19 and already world famous. She proposed to him, but he hesitated. She was too young to marry without parental permission. When they finally wed in 1952, she was 20 and he was 40. Taylor later reflected on that marriage with clarity. I wanted the calm and quiet and security of friendship, but the calm didn't last long. As Wilding grew more passive and looked older than his years, Taylor's restless energy grew. In 1957, she left him for another older man. Film producer Mike Todd was 3 years older than Wilding and 23 years her senior. But Todd's boundless energy made the age gap feel less noticeable, at least for a while. Sadly, their marriage ended just a year later when Todd died in a plane crash. Years later, Taylor flipped the script. In 1991, at age 59, she married Luke Fortensky, who was 20 years her junior. Number 6. Bing Crosby and Katherine Grant, 53 and 23. Bing Crosby was already a legend, a crooner, an actor, a widower. Katherine Grant was a fresh-faced 23-year-old actress just getting her start when they began seeing each other. Their courtship was long and full of delays. As Grant later said in an interview, "We kept planning to get married, but then he'd get a kidney stone or something dreadful. But eventually, in 1957, they tied the knot in a secret Las Vegas ceremony. Crosby, ever private, tricked the press by giving them the wrong church address. He was 53, she was 23. The 30-year age gap didn't seem to trouble Grant. By the time we married, I realized I could survive without him, and he realized he didn't want to survive without me," she recalled. "That's a good attitude to enter a marriage with." They had 3 children and stayed married until Crosby's death in 1977. Number 7. Carlo Ponti and Sophia Loren, 38 and 16. Sophia Loren once said it was love at first sight. She was just 16, sitting at a table with friends at a beauty contest in Rome, when Carlo Ponti, a 38-year-old film producer and jury member, sent her a note encouraging her to compete. She placed second. But more importantly, it was the beginning of something serious. They began as friends. By the time Loren was 19, it had turned into romance. But there was a complication. Ponti was already married, and in Italy, divorce was next to impossible. In 1957, they tried to get around the law by securing a divorce and marriage by proxy through a court in Mexico. But Italy didn't recognize the divorce, though it did recognize the new marriage. Suddenly, Ponti was legally a bigamist. They annulled the marriage to avoid legal trouble, but didn't give up. Eventually, they became French citizens, and in 1966, nearly a decade later, they finally married legally. They remained together for over 40 years until Ponti's death in 2007. Number 8. Cary Grant and Betsy Drake, 43 and 24. By the late 1940s, Cary Grant was one of the biggest stars in the world. Married twice already, he was charming, polished, and 43 years old when he met Betsy Drake, a bright, thoughtful 24-year-old actress performing on stage in London. They took the same shit back to America, started talking, and never really stopped. Within 2 years, they were married. It was a quieter match than his past romances, and Drake wasn't your typical Hollywood wife. She introduced Grant to LSD therapy, studied psychology, and wasn't afraid to challenge him. But the marriage hit a rough patch in 1956. Grant left to film in Europe with a young Sophia Loren and promptly fell in love with her. He even proposed despite still being married to Drake. Loren turned him down. Not long after, Drake was involved in a harrowing incident. Her ocean liner collided with another ship and sank, killing over 50 people. She survived. Grant, however, didn't even leave set. Their marriage never quite recovered. They separated shortly after and officially divorced in 1962. Still, their bond endured. Over a decade later, Grant proudly told a reporter, "I'll be talking to Betsy later today." She wanted to help humanity. Number 9. John Huston and Enrica Soma, 45 and 20. Director John Huston had a larger-than-life personality and a complicated love life. He met ballet dancer Enrica Soma when she was only 14, but it wasn't until years later, when she was 18, that things turned romantic. Soma became his mistress, and soon his wife. On a single day in 1950, Huston traveled to Mexico, finalized his divorce from his third wife, and married Soma, who was 20. He was 45. Their marriage wasn't easy. They had children, including actress Angelica Huston, but also secrets. One daughter, Allegra, grew up believing Huston was her father until she learned, at 12, that her mother had conceived her during an affair with a British lord. The couple never divorced. When Soma died suddenly in 1969 at the age of 39, they were still legally married, but emotionally distant. Number 10. Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli, 23 and 42. By the time Judy Garland was 23, she'd already lived a lifetime. She'd been a child star, battled personal demons, and married once to composer David Rose, who was 12 years older than her. In 1944, Garland began filming Meet Me in St. Louis, developed by Vincent Minnelli. He was 42, quiet, stylish, and very different from her. Their working relationship was tense, but eventually something shifted. Private dinners turned into a romance. There were complications. Garland rekindled her affair with producer Joe Mankiewicz, and Minnelli's sexuality was the subject of much quiet speculation, which Garland reportedly ignored. Still, just 1 week after finalizing her divorce from Rose, Garland married Minnelli in 1945. Their daughter, Liza Minnelli, was born soon after. But the issues they'd brushed aside came back to haunt them. The marriage unraveled, and by 1951, it was over. Number 11. John Wayne and Pilar Pelle, 47 and 24. In 1952, John Wayne was shooting a film in the jungles of Peru when he met a young actress named Pilar Pelle. Sparks flew, but Wayne was still married, unhappily, and allegations of abuse and infidelity swirled on both sides. Pelle later became pregnant and chose to have an abortion, worried about the scandal and how it might affect Wayne's public image. When the divorce from his second wife was finalized, Wayne and Pelle quietly married in 1954. He was 47, she was 24. Pelle later described Wayne as youthful, energetic, not at all like an older man. They had 3 children and were married for 25 years, though they lived separately for the last 6. When Wayne died in 1979, she wasn't included in his will, but his lawyers said she had already received a financial settlement. Number 12. Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra Gail Brown, 22 and 13. Jerry Lee Lewis may not be a classic film star, but his life touched Hollywood and scandalized it. In 1958, the rock and roll wild man arrived in the UK for a tour. Reporters noticed a very young girl traveling with him. She wasn't just a relative, she was his wife. Myra Gail Brown was 15, or so Lewis claimed. In truth, she was 13, and she was his cousin. But he wasn't even divorced from his previous wife, meaning he'd committed bigamy. The outrage was immediate. His career collapsed overnight. Though the scandal nearly destroyed him, the marriage to Myra Gail Brown lasted 13 years. She finally filed for divorce in 1970, citing abuse and infidelity. In the golden glow of old Hollywood, some love stories hid uncomfortable truths. Age gaps, power imbalances, secret affairs, they were all part of the drama behind the scenes. Some couples made it work, others didn't. But their stories remind us that fame doesn't shield anyone from complicated choices or lasting consequences.